welcome to Meeples on Meeples, episode 44. I'm Adam.
I'm Patrick.
Andrew.
And as usual, before we get into our game of the week this week, we want to invite you over to our website, meeplesonmeeples.com, where we have all of our videos, our component images, and a few written reviews, which we've updated forever ago, but you can check them out. And as well as our Facebook page, facebook.com/meeplesonmeeples. Come like us over there. We post a few links every once in a while, a few questions of the week to kind of get feedback from the audience. And I'll hand it over to Pat.
This week's game was Mansions of Madness by Fantasy Flight. Now, Mansions of Madness is based on H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu and horror science fiction novels and short stories. And basically the idea is you have a group of investigators coming to a mansion or a location trying to figure out what has been going on, solving the mystery, and then bringing the end to the ominous effect that's going to be taking place. Now, this game is set up very strategically, in which one person plays the keeper, which is the one who's playing kind of the ill omen that is going to be taking effect, and everyone else plays the investigators. Now, there's 2 turns to every round. The first turn is the investigators. The investigators can do one of a few things, or a couple of a few things. They can move, and each room is broken up into different sections, and they can move 2 spaces that are separated by white lines, or go through doors. They can then, after they do their movement or between movements, they can then perform an action. An action could be looking into the room, finding special cards, trying to solve a puzzle or a lock that keeps them locked out of the room, or attacking a monster that's in their space. As you can tell, there's a lot of different things that they can do.
Go into hiding.
Try to hide a trunk from the monsters.
Something we've never done, but you can also barricade doors because there's furniture.
Yeah, you can move. I mean, that's the neat thing about it. So you can move furniture in front of the door. But their main goal is to try to figure out the clues, find the clues, and then bring it to an end so that the investigators win. Now, after the investigators go, it's the keeper's turn. And on the keeper's turn, if you're in the investigators, if they're in the same space as each other, can exchange items. Then the keeper can do several things. At the beginning of the turn, and each scenario is different, the scenario tells the keeper what keeper cards that he has. These cards give him special abilities. He also gains threat tokens that he can spend with the keeper cards that allow him to do things such as place monsters, move monsters, make bad things happen to the individuals, spread fire, just do all the things that you can think of in a horror story. After he's done playing all of his cards, he can get his monsters to attack somebody in their same room. And then when that's done, there are the plot cards. And at the end of his turn, he places a little marker on the plot cards, and each plot card has a number on them. And when you get the number of time tokens equal to the number on the card, you turn it over, you read it to the investigators, it advances the story, it might give them a few hints, things change in the building, and it goes on. The keeper's main goal is to find as many clues as they can and defeat
the investigators.
Excuse me. The main role of the investigators is to find as many clues as they can and find out the way to defeat the keeper, which is dependent upon the scenario. Now, there's a lot more rules than that. Combat is really neat in that there's no rolling of dice. You flip over cards to figure out what happens between the monsters and the investigators.
But then you do have to roll
based on the effect.
Based on the attribute that the card calls.
Yeah. So there's rolling, there's card play, there's a lot of rules, and I'm not going to go any further. What I'm going to tell you is, before you play this game, the keeper has to sit down with the rule book and know them inside out. It also helps if the players do that as well. It makes it go smoothly because there's all these little options that each player has.
And typically, when we set up our games for reviews, we make it look nice and pretty so you can see what the game looks like. We purposely kind of left it as it was at the end of our last game to show you just, I guess, how complex this game is. It's the board, there's cards everywhere. I mean, it's a really... a very hardcore, in-depth game.
Very in-depth game.
Let's start like we normally do with components on this game.
I'm going to jump in with components. The first thing that I love is, even though they're not interlocking pieces, you have a lot of cards. These are heavy
Where's
cardboard.
Brian when you need him?
No kidding. I had to throw that in there because he's not here. They're heavy cardboard, dual-sided. Each scenario tells you which boards to place out and where to place them out. And there are a lot of options out there. I mean, there's many different ways that you can set the board up. There's many different suggestions. You can even create your own scenarios, your own background, but there's a lot of different boards.
On the component side, I love everything in this game, to be perfectly honest. It's a Fantasy Flight game, so they did everything right as they normally do. I mean, the art's good.
But not interlocking pieces.
Not interlocking pieces. They can't be perfect.
In this game, interlocking pieces would be pretty difficult because there's what, you said 30 strategies? Or 30?
I have 30 scenarios.
And you reuse the tiles in different orders.
And they're double-sided. I don't care what Brian says. I like interlocking pieces too. If Fantasy Flight made these interlocking,
It wouldn't work.
I would drive somewhere and give somebody a pat on the back because holy wow.
Yeah, that would take a lot of work. The pieces, the monsters and the characters are really nice. They should be painted. I'm not sure why.
It's my fault. That's my bad. I haven't done that.
But look at that thing. What is that thing called again?
Which one? The Shoggoth?
Shoggoth. That thing's amazing.
The Chthonians.
This thing's gonna give me nightmares.
They have zombies. The one thing that's really neat about this play is each zombie isn't the same. When you set these characters up, you slide in a monster card into the base, and all of their stats are hidden from you. And it's not until the monster attacks or that it takes damage that you see its stat. Not all zombies are the same. Some zombies are stronger than the others, some are weaker. Some have different special abilities that they can use when they attack. So you never know what you're going to run up against when you go and attack a zombie.
One downside I'm going to throw out there, and we've talked about this in other reviews, I think, mini cards. Exactly. I know why they did it, because there's so many, and it would be ridiculous if you had full-size cards. But look at all these decks we have, and they're all different.
Yeah.
You got all these different spell decks, the keeper's cards, our items you'd use as the investigators. But they're just so hard to keep track of.
Yeah, but the artwork on them, I'm gonna say, is amazing. I mean, it's just
each card has a different art when you're
every single the backs, so you can tell which ones go with which. Every single card has got its own little unique spin on it. Yep. Each scenario, I'm assuming, has its own.
I'm a big fan of the keeper cards too.
Yeah, the keeper cards are double-sided because everyone can see what they can do. And there's a lot. There's chits for everybody. We're buried in chits. We're up to our necks in chits. There's a lot of chits. Each one has a special meaning. They each look differently. Yep. So it's really, really well designed. I mean, this is one of the things I like about it is it looks nice. When it's on your table, it's pretty.
We can go on and on about components, I think.
Did it come with the 10-sided die?
It came with one 10-sider. Okay. I purchased extras, but it did come with one 10-sider. My suggestion is buy one for each player, so you don't keep passing it around, because there's times when everybody's rolling at once when a monster walks in.
That's taking off like 4 points from me right there. You only get one die.
Yeah, I know. But they came with everything else that does it well.
How about strategy on this game? I think that's really where this game shines.
I'll start with the keeper. The keeper strategy is to screw everybody else over as fast as you can, split them up. Think of the horror story. As the keeper, you are writing the horror story. So you want to put them on their edge. You want to put them into a corner. I had fire spreading all throughout the building, trying to get them into a corner and lock them in. I had zombies all over the place. I drove Ian, who's not sitting in on this review, but I drew him insane really early on so he could just hamper everybody else. So the keeper, be very aggressive, because if you're not aggressive, it's actually a little too easy for the investigators to win.
On the investigator side, I think this strategy worked well both times. We really got a full game, and it stayed together. Do not split up too much. Try to keep within a few rooms.
Yeah, exactly. Stay within a few rooms so that within 1 or 2 turns you can be back together if you need to.
Because he can really split you up. Like at one point got like 3 zombies in a room between a couple of the investigators, and that's hard to handle. So it's nice if you guys can kind of regroup, stay close enough where you can all get together and then go after the zombies all at once.
One thing I'd also say to the investigators,
whatever the bad guy is,
know your special abilities. Each investigator card has a series of special abilities and starting items that they have. Know your special abilities and make that plan. They had the physician, and they accidentally drove him off by himself, so he wasn't protected. Well, he's not the best person with the most willpower, which is what you roll against when a monster enters into your room. So I was able to drive him insane very quickly.
And since the investigators get to choose their characters, I think it'd be best, like, we all just chose one that we liked. We didn't really consult with each other, like, this guy might play better with this guy, and this one might play better with this. We might have done that.
Yeah, you want to spread, maybe get somebody with the muscle, somebody with the high intellect, that type of stuff.
And then use them
keep
properly.
That in mind when we're playing.
Yeah, and use them properly. The person with the high intellect, you want them to solve puzzles, which is something we didn't talk about. This game is just like a horror film where
I think
there's puzzles in it.
Jump into likes and dislikes. I mean, strategy.
It depends on who you play.
It depends on the scenario, and it depends on all kinds of variables.
On likes and dislikes, one thing I like is this game actually has puzzles, and it's not like a mind puzzle. It is real, actual puzzles. I mean, you get little pieces. I don't know how many of these things there are.
Oh, there's quite a few.
But you got some of them are about matching colors. Some of them are actually about a real puzzle, making a picture out of it. It's a really unique way to handle it. I mean, it's a very interactive. They could have done something as simple as, you roll a die to see if you pass the puzzle. No, you actually do a real puzzle, and and there's a lot of them.
It reminds me a lot. I'm sure everybody's played Resident Evil.
Yep.
Just, you're playing along, you're fighting, and all of a sudden, puzzle. That's exactly what you're like. Oh, I'm going. Dead in the water, there's a puzzle. And you cannot go any farther until you solve the puzzle.
It's just a really neat way to handle it.
I also like that because the first game we played, my guy only had like 2 skill points. So I could only do 2 moves on a puzzle.
2 intellect.
2 intellect, yeah. I'm sorry. But he could only do 2 moves, but the puzzle stays. So if another investigator comes along and sees it, it's already partially done, so they can start where I left off.
Yep. You can't talk when you're doing a puzzle either. That's one of the rules in it.
It technically, I don't think it is actually timed, but we limit each person to 2 minutes.
Well, that's actually
time.
that's a variable that you can put into it. If you do play it where you have unlimited time, this game will drag out for hours. So we limit it that each person has 2 minutes to solve a puzzle. And really, thought that you're in a horror movie.
Usually, I think the most we've had is 6 intellect for a character. So if you can't do 6 moves in 2 minutes, you're in trouble.
Especially with something you can't pre-plan.
The other thing I like is it's based on H.P. Lovecraft's novels and short stories. And the interesting thing is they use characters and names and locations of the H.P. Lovecraft mythology, and that's kind of fun with it too, because you can actually feel his style into the game. How it can play very, very well.
One thing I like about this is kind of the way sanity plays into this game. We've talked about this before when we were first playing the game. It reminds me a lot of, it was one of my favorite games back on the GameCube, Eternal Darkness, where the game basically played with your sanity. As your guy went insane, things happened to them. Like it pretended like you lost your saved game. It pretended like it shut off your TV. Like it really played with your mind. This game has that same idea. You have sanity. The keeper, works it down over time, and as he does, he can cause you to do things. He can use you as one of his own, bad guys, basically, to fight the other people. And
it really drives me insane when he is controlling me. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like, stop doing that. 3 places. I'm on a team with these guys, and you're making me do this to them, and I don't like it.
Yeah, we had Ian again, who actually is sitting out on this review. He actually was
nuts.
He went fully insane, lost his insanity, and so if Pat had gotten him close enough to us, he could have had Ian attacking us, doing damage.
He had a shotgun at one point. I was just waiting for him to get close enough to you guys to.
I think that's a really neat idea. Like I said, if you've played Eternal Darkness, you like that idea. I think this is like a board game variation of that, basically.
Oh, definitely.
The only dislike I have, and it's not really a dislike, it's just a warning ahead of time. You got to invest in setup. Setup takes, as you can see, a while. Keeper, you have your own book that tells you what you're setting up. The investigators have their rule book that explains to them what they need to set up. And Keeper, you have to know where their cards go. If you mess up where you see the cards in the mansion
and the order they're laid
in,
they're stacked.
They can't win. It's an end game. You have made the mistake and you've just ruined the experience for the game. So Keeper, you really have to double check, triple check, and know where your cards are.
Pat came with the idea of what one he was going to play. So he knew kind of ahead of time. And it was still probably a 30-minute setup.
Yeah, it takes a while. You invest in the setup, so that it's not, you can't help it with this type of game.
But it's like a 2 to 3 hour game.
No, so I even like the setup, but like we talked about the board, is these pieces, you don't just lay it out. It has to be specifically in a certain order, and they're all, and it's crazy because it kind of looks like they're just big blocks, but they're actually,
some are thin,
some are thin, some are wide, and they maneuver them so some of the thin ones are horizontal, some are vertical. I love that.
The one thing is, in the original edition of this game, there was some errors. So if you purchase this game, download the FAQ just in case you got the first edition out there, because there were some errors in setup. And if you can't set up the game right, you can't play it correctly. So just be aware of checking out the FAQs.
My last I'm going to throw in on it, as we've talked about, is the components on this thing. It's just... how much is this game again?
I would have to look that up. I can check that up here real quick.
No, it's not.
I don't know. It was a spendy game.
I mean, are we talking like $60,
70, something like that?
That's still really good for it.
Yeah. Is that with expansions?
No, with the expansions, I've loved this game. So I have with one of the expansions that we played with. I was going to mention this, we played one of the Forbidden Alchemy scenarios that has a prologue and an epilogue, which is kind of puts the whole story in a sandwich. And That was another, I think, 20, 30.
That's one, before we go into the reviews, one little dislike I had is the first scenario we played.
Did not have an epilogue.
It didn't have an epilogue, and it was one of them where you could complete it without getting all the clues, without getting the whole story. And I wasn't a big fan of that. Like,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed what we were playing, and then I found out we could win the game without actually even figuring out what the whole story was.
And then there were some, and that's why the expansions have improved. Is that they have this story, and that's why I purchased several of the expansions just because they do have a much more full story.
All right, let's do our reviews. Scale 1 to 10, 10 being amazing, 1 being terrible, 5 being it's all right. I'll kick it off. I'm gonna give this game. I'm gonna go an 8.5 on it. I'm typically not really into the hardcore kind of board games as much. I really like this game, everything about it. I mean, it's well done. For how complex it is, and this is always a big thing with me, we rarely, if ever, looked at the rulebook for this thing.
There was a couple. The first game we did much more. The second game we were much more fluid.
I mean, for a 2-hour game, though, I mean, it was barely touching that game.
I mean, if we had to look at it 4 times, I would be surprised.
This game just works really, really well.
And once you pick it up, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
next.
and you can set up the game, and you do your long setup, granted, but then it just flows really well. It's a good story. You feel very immersed in it. The sanity thing, I think, helps with that a lot. It's a lot of player interaction. It's not just your turn. It's, you work with the investigators. When it comes to the investigator turn, you say, okay, who's going to go first this time? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? What items do you have? When are we going to use those? Or when is that going to be helpful to us? Where do we need to go? I mean, it's not one of those where you're going to sit back and just let everybody else do something, and then when it's your turn, do your stuff, and then ignore it. You're very invested. It handles the story and theme extremely well. The components, I think, add to that. Like I said, I love the actual physical puzzle idea. The fact that you actually have to do a puzzle. I just like everything about this. The only thing that keeps it back for me, one, is the time investment. Both the setup, takedown, and the play. It is a little long for some people. The other one would be certain of the scenarios, like we discussed, where
they're weaker.
I mean, this game is... What makes this game so good is the story. Like, it gets you immersed in it. And the fact that you can play certain scenarios and not actually get the whole story,
or the story ending is sometimes just
yeah, you don't really get
you really
get like a one
scenarios.
sentence of you lost. Well, thanks. Or the zombie ate you or something. I mean, it doesn't give you a real good conclusion. Yeah. So that brings it down a little for me. Otherwise, it's a really good game.
Yeah, you have to pick you're right. You have to pick your scenario correctly. I'm not gonna lie. I love this game. I give this a 9. It is one of my games. It's one of my favorite games. It hasn't hit our table very often before this because of the setup and of the intensity. I like the pieces. I like the theme. I like the scenarios. I like the fact that they're still publishing expansions for this. There's another expansion I already want for this. There's several print and play expansions. I have 4 of those. There's 2 full box expansions.
Oh, wow.
And Call of the Wild is one, I believe, and Forbidden Alchemy is one I have. I want the next one because it's more outside stuff. Anyways, we'll get into that another time.
Okay,
yeah.
But
anyways, I love this piece. I love the play, the theme. I don't think there's very much wrong with it. Of course, there's the setup that you have to be aware of. I like the fact that it plays much better than, and it's not the same genre, not the same theme, but Betrayal at House on the Hill. I like this theme better. It's
that's what I was going to mention. If you want a comparison for the game, it's like Betrayal after the traitor's revealed. That's but a much more in-depth version.
Yeah, much more in-depth. But I just like the theme, the play, and the pieces are just amazing. So I'm giving it a 9.
Well, I found this game online. I was looking, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Hey, has anybody played this?" And Pat goes, "I have that game, and it's awesome." And it took us 6 months to play it, and I asked about it all the time. And now that I've played it, I absolutely love it. The little details, like Adam said, with the rules, you don't have to check in. There's certain weapons that say that you can shoot through a door. Otherwise, if it doesn't say that you can shoot through a door, you can't.
It's all very clear. Yeah.
It's very, very specific. You can in the next space, regardless of door. You can do this. These pop off, but there's attributes on the underside that you can't tell what they are until they attack you or you attack them. There's little pieces so you can keep track of how many hit points they have left, down to keeping the chits. Everything about it, I had so much fun. I didn't know because at first sometimes I'm not into the in-depth. The story drew me in. The cards are great. I'm gonna give it a 9 for a few things like mini cards. They drive me crazy. I'm sorry that it's gotta be a 9, but it's. And I understand that obviously, we don't have a big enough table. We'd have to have twice the table to have full
Everything.
size.
And this is not a small table.
No, it's not. It's like what, 4x7?
4x7, yeah.
But and just a few things with a few of the rules, but otherwise amazing, fantastic, loved every bit of it.
Before we go, one thing I do have to say, we do have a member of ours that's colorblind. A couple of the puzzles with that were hard to do because of the color blindness. They do have shapes. They do have different
you
designs.
Can't see this on here. They do color and shapes, but the color and shape are both very, very small. You're talking like pinhead size.
And then the rune puzzles. I mean, the puzzles are great, but sometimes they're very small, so they use colored and shapes, and it is a little tricky. And just throwing that out there as a statement.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Mansions of Madness.